Well, good evening. I'm Father David. Thank you for joining me today for Disciple Time as we are continuing with our theme this week at Holy Communion. God is on the move, welcoming everyone. And as I think about that statement in general, God is on the move, welcoming everyone, I have to kind of check that a little bit because sometimes that's not the experience that we have when we go to church, right? Sometimes when I hear someone say that they don't care for church, they don't care for Christians and all this stuff, it's because there's some past experience informing and shaping their opinion about it. And unfortunately, a lot of times their complaint is kind of accurate because maybe they tried to go at some point and they were treated maybe rudely. They were made to feel ashamed because of how they were dressed, or maybe no one spoke to them while they were at church. And so they came and never experienced a welcoming spirit. And in fact, most of the people that have an issue with church and that usually report to me, if I'm in a discussion with them, that they had some kind of bad experience when they went. And a prime example of this I can think of personally was this Gothic girl that came once to a church I served in Florida. And she was, when she came in, she was distressed already as she came through the door. And I knew that it had probably taken a lot emotionally and spiritually to get her to the point, to where she felt comfortable even coming in the door. And yet, I quickly overheard this lady who kind of grew up in church. She was very informed in church culture and, the way you should dress and all this stuff in church. And she quickly kind of went over to this lady and basically dressed her down kind of rudely for wearing this inappropriate outfit she was wearing to church, as the older lady saw it. And the older lady didn't really register the unchurched lady's emotional distress. She didn't register the cut marks on her forearm that obviously told a story that she needed help from higher power. She instead, I think, was focusing on the dark eyeliner, the tattoos this girl had on her shoulders and neck. I think she was focusing on the nose ring maybe she was wearing. And unfortunately, the girl, kind of left shortly after her encounter with Christ's devoted follower. And this was the memory that came to my mind when I looked at the gospel reading. See, because while the older lady who grew up in church kind of had an idea in her head of what church is all about and how you need to dress when you get there and all that, and while she might have been in her mind dressed appropriately for the church occasion and looked very holy and ready for church on the outside, I think the problem was her heart wasn't in that same place. Her heart was in a judgy place, maybe not ready to welcome that unchurched person that really needed an encounter with God's grace. And so instead of making her feel welcome, she dressed her down and basically shooed her off. And that's kind of bad because that's what came to my mind when I was reading this bit in Matthew 23, 25 through 26, where we see Jesus talking about the Pharisees doing this. And he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they're full of plunder and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup, so that the outside also may be clean." I want to say, there's nothing wrong with looking good for church. And, people that are growing up in church and from church families over multi-generations especially, There's a certain expectation when you get up on Sunday to wear something that's appropriate as defined by whatever culture the church has. And church culture is widely different. So you might go to one church and they're very formal and stuffy, like this church I served in Florida, or you might come to a church in Bend, or something like that, and it's really informal. You could come in hiking shoes and shorts and just be welcome. And that's one of the things I really love about the church here at Holy Communion. And so, Jesus had a lot of sayings about this state of the inner heart needing to be loving and compassionate versus this outer appearance of looking holy, right? So the inner need to be holy versus the outer, look holy type of thing. And then Jesus would move forward and always in these circumstances compassionately include that unaccepted outcast, showing that person that God loves them and desires to be in spiritual communion with them, regardless of how they look on the outside, regardless of the circumstances that they might be in. There's a desire for relationship. And I think cultivating a welcoming atmosphere, that has to be part of it, right? Just kind of not looking at the outside, but really trying to focus on the soul and the heart that's coming through the door. And so I think if we really want to be followers of Christ, what inner disposition should we have? Obviously, Jesus didn't want us to just superficially look at the exterior of a person. And I think we see the answer to this and kind of get an idea in our reading from 1 Thessalonians today, chapter 2, verse 7 through 8, where we read this: "Rather, we were gentle among you, as a nursing mother cares for her children with such affection for you. We were determined to share with you not only the gospel, but our very selves as well." Now, that's quite a contrast in deportment, right? Do we see like the inner disposition shift here? So instead of judging the outward appearance, Paul is encouraging the church to look deeper, to see those people that are coming through the doors of the church like they're your younger child, like they're a relative of yours, like it's your daughter or your son. And imagine how different, right, that Gothic girl that visited that church in Florida would have felt if that same exact church lady would have noticed, instead of her clothes, would have noticed her inner distress, would have looked past the outward appearance of her dress, and just put her arm around her and then nurtured her as if that Gothic girl was the only daughter she ever had. And I think that's a key to having a welcoming spirit, is to see the people coming through the door like, this is that son or daughter or brother, sister you never had, and they're finally coming through the door, and you're finally getting a chance to welcome them. And so what a difference that would have made, I think, in that situation. And what do we see was the purpose of this compassion that Jesus would show, or that Paul was demonstrating? Not only could the good news of Jesus and the gospel at that point be shared, but also in sharing their very selves with one another, they would form a tighter community and bond. And who knows what happened to that lady when she left that church, right? Like, where did she go and do? How did she respond to the judgment and the ridicule she received when she was looking for help from the church? What happened when she left? How did that affect her? We'll never know. But that's what I think the real Christ follower, the devoted Christian, the kind of attitude they should be cultivating, creating that welcoming environment. And that's what we're focusing on this week. So where people not only feel welcome and then open to receive the gospel, but also where they can feel at home and like they're part of a community. I think, like I said, we do that really well at Holy Communion Church. I'm preaching to the choir right now. But what's the application for today? I think it's this, right? Look past the surface and show compassion to whoever God brings through the door. And I think if we do that, we'll see God is on the move, welcoming everyone. Well, thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you next week.